Hey guys, Matt here. Before we begin this episode of Tower Junkies, I just want to mention that we are currently running a contest where you can win a free Tower Junkies t-shirt. The contest runs from now until January 1st, 2018, and if you want to enter, all you have to do is leave a rating and a review of the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, take a screenshot of the review, and email it to matt@obsessiveviewer.com with the subject line Tower Junkies t-shirt contest. On January 1st, I'll randomly select a winner from the entries, and we'll get a free t-shirt mailed to them. We'll be accepting entries until December 31st at midnight, so make sure you get the email in before then. Thank you guys for listening, and enjoy this week's episode of Tower Junkies.
You're clean, aren't you? Except for your tower. You're a tower junkie, Roland.
Hello and welcome to Tower Junkies, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. Tower Junkies is a podcast devoted to Stephen King and his magnum opus, the Dark Tower series. We discuss the themes, characters, and mythology of the series in Palaver episodes and review the books and comic series in Kef episodes. We also discuss King novels related to the Dark Tower, non-Tower King novels, TV and film adaptations of King's work, and the latest news about potential Dark Tower-related adaptations. You can find more of our work at TowerJunkiesPod.com and follow us on every level of social media at TowerJunkiesPod. I am your host, Matt Hurt, and with me today is Tiny. Hi, Tiny.
Hello, friends.
How's it going?
Magnificently.
Great. And do you want to tell the listeners what we're going to be doing today?
Today we're going to be talking about Jake Chambers, the famed member of the Ka-Tet.
Yes. Jake Chambers from the Dark Tower series.
Right.
Yeah, today is going to be all about him. It's part of our ongoing series, of which we've had one episode, all about the Ka-Tet, character by character. So,
right.
So today's episode is going to be all about Mr. Jake Chambers. So, of course, the way we're going to do it is that we're going to have a non-spoiler discussion just about the broad characterizations of the character, and then we'll go into a more spoilerific spoiler section, and then kind of go from there. We will prompt you when we go into spoilers, so no worries there. So before we do that, as we like to do on this podcast, Tiny, do you have any King check-ins, anything Stephen King related that's going on in your life?
I do. I wish it were more advanced than the last episode, but I have started different seasons. That's it.
Oh, nice.
I barely started it.
Okay.
I've just been, my work schedule's been nuts. I kind of got a semi-promotion.
Nice.
So,
congratulations.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So it makes my schedule a little crazier, and so instead of reading, I've been like goofing off on the phone.
Oh, gotcha.
At night and at work.
Okay.
Instead of reading. So I will try to get back on track with that. Where are you in the Kingverse, sir?
In the Kingverse,
Sigh.
where am I?
Hey.
Okay, so I wanted to finish Sleeping Beauties as soon as possible so that we could review it, which that's what we'll be doing in a couple weeks.
Okay.
But I have been just kind of slogging through it.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that I'm not interested in it, because I am actually quite interested in it, and I keep wondering, you don't have to say it or anything, but I remember you saying, like, it reminds you of another one of King's novels, and I'm kind of wondering, like, which one.
Okay.
And I think I've got it narrowed down, but we'll talk more about it when we review it.
Okay.
But I'm about halfway through it at this point, and it's interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it leads. It's just I've had less time to really get into audiobooks lately, because I've been doing 3 different podcasts,
right,
and also playing a lot of video games.
Yeah, I get it. Another silly kind of check-in, and I don't know if you want to post this to the Instagram page or the Twitter feed or whatever, but I'm trying to, like, my big winter project at our house is to, like, redo our basement, and I'm working on the floor, and I'm going to redo the floor, and I was, like, scraping up these like linoleum tiles.
Okay.
And I gave myself a nice little blister on my hand. It hurt really bad. But as it started to heal, like the lines on my hand, like, you know, the natural creases that occur in your hand from movement and what have you, the blister formed, I'm not kidding, into the shape of an H. Yeah. And it made me think of Ben Hanscom being attacked by Henry Bowers when he's a kid, and Henry Bowers carving the H in his stomach, and I was just like, is this a sign? Yeah. You know, is Pennywise going to pop out of the drain in our basement? Right. You know? He probably will, so you should definitely have nightmares about that. So yeah, I sent Matt a picture of it, and yeah, maybe you can post that or something. Yeah. If you really want to. It genuinely surprised me. I was like, how does that happen? Like, it was weird. Yeah. Okay. Fucking badass scar. Not really. I mean, if you want to think that, buddy. God. Anyway. Okay. So, yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'll put that on the Instagram or, you know, whatevs. Kyle wills it. Yes. Yes. I thought I had one more King check-in. I don't know, but do you want to share with the listeners another King check-in that you had tonight? Oh yeah, I recently was gifted a Tower Junkies t-shirt. A Tower Junkies t-shirt? Yeah, from TeePublic. Yes. .com. That's something that you can find on TeePublic.com in the Obsessive Viewer merch store. Totally. That is so awesome. I feel official now. Yeah, right? Yeah. Where'd you get that from? The benefactor was one Matthew William Hurt. Hey, that's me. Middle name in me. Steal my identity. No. Yeah. Anyway. That's also my Twitter password, oddly enough. Anyway, I'm kidding. But yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, I had gotten myself Tower Junkies shirt as well, and yeah, they came out really good. Mm-hmm. We have two versions on the website. One is the logo with the tagline, a podcast discussing Stephen King and the Dark Tower, and then one is just the logo that just says Tower Junkies with two gun symbols or drawings, images. Renderings. Yeah, so go check that out. Buy a shirt. And also, we're still giving away a shirt if you want to give us a iTunes rating and review and email it to us. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about Jake Chambers in a non-spoiler and spoiler discussion. So first up, let's just kind of talk about our broad feelings about the character in the series, and in broad terms without spoiling the greater elements of the Dark Tower. So, Tiny, when it comes to the Dark Tower and Roland's Ka-Tet, the Ka-Tet of 19, or the Ka-Tet of 99, or the Ka-Tet of 1999. How do you feel about Jake Chambers overall? I feel like Jake is the unofficial number 2. Like, number 2, you look so healthy and youthful. Frau, you look so right. No, but he is kind of like, I feel like he's the right hand man. I feel like he is the second most important member of the Ka-Tet, next to Roland. And we'll get into why I feel that way and all that in later on in the episode. But, Jake is just such a fascinating kid. I think Stephen King actually writes children quite well. Reference some of his other books like Cujo or It. He writes kids very well. So I think, you know, that skill is on full display and throughout the series. And what's great about him is that he feels like a kid sometimes, but a lot of the time he acts like an adult. And I think a lot of moments are made more tender, for lack of a better phrase, because of the fact that there's a child present. Sure. I think the Midworld is very bleak, because it is moved on and it's in the process of moving on. And so to add a little ray of sunshine in the form of Jake Chambers, I think softens the series for the reader throughout it, makes it more lighthearted and enjoyable. So I think he's important to the series for that reason, and we'll get into all the reasons why he's integral to the story as well. He's just a fascinating kid and a really good character. I think one of Stephen King's best characters, because of how critical he is to this story, which is the linchpin of all the Stephen King universe. And just because of the fact that he's a fun character and he's well written, and I hope my son is like Jake Chambers. I don't know. I don't even know if I'll have a son. But no, he's cool. He's a nice kid, and it's really Stephen King's it with this kid a lot too. So, which I think our listeners will know what I mean by that. Without getting into spoilers, yeah, he's just a fascinating character, and I think he's probably the second most important member of the Ka-Tet in my book.
Yeah, and I agree with you to an extent, or I mean not to an extent, but I do share a lot of those sentiments. I would say that in terms of the hierarchy of the Ka-Tet, I would put him just below Eddie.
Okay.
But it's kind of hard to gauge because he's, Roland has such a definable bond with Eddie that's different from his bond with Jake and Susanna and everyone else. And it's kind of tough. It's kind of a hard kind of thing to say, because at times Jake is like he's the son, he's the child of it, and then Eddie's like the older brother, adult figure when Roland is not around and stuff. Like when Roland is not there to guide him, Eddie and Jake have this connection that it's a sibling kind of thing,
right?
And
kind
sort
of like an unspoken sort of bond.
Yeah, exactly.
Brotherly bond.
Right. And the connection between Roland and Jake is very strong, because he's our introduction to the gunslingers, not necessarily through the eyes of Jake, but there's a lot to the introduction to the entire series that's contingent on the relationship between Jake and the gunslinger.
Right.
And it's something that Stephen King does well. I think when we had Tony on to talk about the gunslinger with me a couple weeks, there was some slight shortcomings that he experienced with it, just being that he didn't feel like the bond was that strong there, which he raised some really interesting points, and I could definitely see where he was coming from, but knowing the context of the whole story and everything, it's gave me a different read of it whenever I revisit it.
Right.
But more in broad terms, Jake is, I love the way that he is at times the child. Like you said, he kind of softens the story for us a little bit, but at other times he is a very precocious, very, old soulish kind of character.
Yeah.
And I think a big thing, or a big reason for that, or a big reason for that is that he is kind of I don't know how I would characterize it. Maybe not an emotional anchor, but he's like he's somewhat of the linchpin between the entire Ka-Tet, a little bit. Like he has this connection with every member of the Ka-Tet that's very strong in and of itself. And granted, like everyone has, it's a Ka-Tet, they're all connected and everything. But it kind of seems like since Jake is a child, it's kind of a more nurturing kind of thing. Like these are his role models and his family, and viewing the Ka-Tet through the eyes of Jake is a little stronger than through the eyes of other characters in the Ka-Tet, just because he is this child that's still kind of growing. Yeah. And I like how he has this that connection kind of plays out throughout the series. Yeah.
I think one thing of note is Jake's kind of relationship with, I would say his relationship with Ka, I feel like all the different characters kind of interpret it in different ways or have different relationships. The way they detect when Ka is at work, I guess. And so I feel like Jake has a special connection with Ka because of his life experiences. I don't want to spoil it, but Jake's been through a lot that I think he goes through a lot, I guess, that is the result of Ka being at work. And I feel like he more so than the other characters experiences that. You know, the actual like destiny. Like he has more. I think he has more of a destiny with Ka than some of the other characters do. Like I think Eddie is very good at detecting when Ka is being used, because Eddie's obsessed with 19 throughout the story, and he kind of he is arguably the best at picking up on like that kind of stuff, whereas Jake just has this kind of like knowledge. He's almost like you said, old soulish in that way, because he's seen some shit, put it that way. And so I think that's, and then Roland is interesting because I feel like he has those same perceptions, but I feel like his relationship with Ka is like, it's just going to come and go. Like he's an extra old soul because he's like, he's been around the block for so long that he's experienced Ka for so long that he doesn't even try to interpret it or understand it or necessarily even acknowledge when it's being used. Cause the other characters will be like, oh, that guy's name has 19 letters in it. Or it's like, the number 19 is popping up all the time, and he's just like, yeah, it's just Ka. Yeah. Right. Who cares? You know, like it's not a big, the number 19 is never really that big of a deal to Roland. So it's just interesting how I feel like the different characters have their own sort of relationship with the will of Gan, and Jake is no exception to that. Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on something that I'm going to kind of roll with a little bit, but their perception of Ka is really interesting. Like, I'd never really given it much thought until just now, but like, at least between, among Roland, Jake, and Eddie, like, it is this interesting kind of trio of perceiving Ka. Like, you have, like you said, like, Roland is this guy who's just, he's been at the mercy of Ka for forever. So it's kind of just this thing that he's accustomed to, and it just he kind of goes with the flow. And then Eddie is this person that has this brief, like, fleeting, like, experience with it. Like, he has this thought about it, but he doesn't really, his brain doesn't register exactly what it is. So like you said, the 19, he also has the wood carving thing that he doesn't really understand until it needs to be understood. Whereas Jake has this, he's more perceptive to all of the Ka elements of their journey. Right. But he's such a kind of precocious kid that he just kind of processes that, and it's more like he's more, he's one with the Force. Right. Yeah, he's one with the Force, and the Force is with him. Yeah. No, I would describe it quickly. I would describe Jake as a victim of Ka. Okay, yeah. That's how, which, and again, without going into spoilers, he has to, Ka acts on Jake a lot. Like, it's not just like Ka is present, or, I'm going with the flow of the river of Ka, if you will. It's like, no, it's like a force that hits Jake. It's not just getting caught up in destiny. It's a lot more than that for him. And I would describe him as almost like a battered victim of Ka. Sure. Which is maybe a little extreme, but that just kind of comes to mind, I guess. Yeah, I can definitely see that for sure. Yeah. Is there anything really else to say in non-spoilers? Because we can kind of dance around it a little bit, or we can dive right into more nuanced discussion. How do you feel about the Midworld Jake versus New York City Jake? Because we get some interesting parts of both. That is a good thing to bring up. I think it's funny because, like I said, I think Ka acts on Jake so much, and I think my favorite parts of some of my favorite moments from Jake Chambers is in Drawing of the Three when he's in New York.
Wastelands
When he's in New York. Because I just love the fact that he's this kid consumed by this desire that he doesn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's he's not sure if he's going crazy or not. And he even questions, like, am I insane? Why do I feel like I need to open all these doors and on the other side of it there will be another world that's where I truly belong? And he's like, but I open all these doors and nothing happens. And it's like, he thinks he's going nuts. And to see that through the filter of a child is just crazy. And it's like, I wanted to see that kind of stuff in the movie.
Yeah.
I really wanted to see that, and that'd be visually challenging it'd be challenging to achieve visually. But I think the right director could have pulled it off, and the right crew and everything. And those moments where he feels consumed by his pull to Midworld, those are some of my favorite parts of Jake's character progression.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, because I feel like once he gets to Midworld, he falls in line really well. Like he picks up on the lingo, I think, and like I feel like he falls in line quicker than the other characters.
Yeah.
Who are pulled from Keystone Earth. Yeah, I think it's funny to see him. It's almost like he's born in New York, but he's almost like a fish out of water in New York. Yeah. In Keystone Earth. Like he doesn't belong there. Like he's much more comfortable in Midworld amongst that, his destiny, if you will. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see him on both sides.
And the whole thing with the Wastelands, his kind of distracted, kind of not very present demeanor and everything in it is kind of with a lesser storyteller, it would be almost tropish. Just the fact that, like, oh, it's this kid who's consumed by this idea of this other world. So I mean, but King handles it very strongly. Like he handles it well, and it presents itself in the in a very clear and concise manner and everything. But if he wasn't as good a writer, then we would just get, this kid that's, complaining about dreams to a psychiatrist and then jumping through a portal after typing in a couple letters.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that could be a story in and of itself, like separate, or just like if Stephen King were to write a story about a kid who was thinking he might be going crazy because he feels drawn to another universe or another world, like that right there is just a cool story in and of itself. Yeah. Like you could write a whole novel about that, I think.
And that's kind of one of the things I kind of love about the Dark Tower series is that you have these little nuggets of story that are like big plot lines throughout the series that alone could be their own full-length novel. Like the entire story of Wolves of the Kala could be its own thing. Yeah. The whole Mia Susanna thing could be its own thing. Right. Father Callahan could be his own like novel post Salem's Lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's the whole thing with the way. Let's go into spoilers.
Sure. Let's do that.
Yeah. Before we do that, I actually do have an email that I want to read from one of our listeners. And this comes in from Robert, who is actually, I believe he discovered us through my solo podcast Anthology. And then he, so he said, okay, so this comes from Robert. He is one of the listeners from Anthology and has gravitated over to Tower Junkies. He's actually one of the Patreon supporters over in Anthology.
Oh, thanks.
Which is super exciting because like he actually, as a small tangent, he actually chose the reward tier where he picks what my bonus review on Anthology will be once a month.
Nice.
So yeah, so it was really exciting. I just released that episode last week. So anyway, Robert listened to Tower Junkies and he writes, "Hey Matt, I've been listening to some episodes of Tower Junkies lately because Stephen King is one of my favorite writers and it seems like you are covering everything that interests me." One of my favorite books ever is The Stand, and they keep teasing me with a 4-part movie, but wish they would make like a 10 or 12 episode show on HBO or Netflix.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm writing you because I listened to the latest episode you put out with Tony talking about the gunslinger. Don't hate me, but I enjoyed the Dark Tower movie, mostly just based off Idris Elba, one of my favorite actors, performance. I never read the Dark Tower series, but the movie intrigued me, and I wanted to see why everyone hated the movie so much. I listened to The Gunslinger, and like Tony, I found it very slow and hard to get through, so it was awesome to hear that I wasn't the only one that thought that. I have the drawing of the 3, but haven't listened to it yet, because the first book turned me off a little. But after having listened to you and Tony talk about it, I'm going to listen to it as soon as I can. I wasn't aware of it being released in a magazine first, so that kind of explains a lot. Anyway, I'll email with my thoughts after I listen to it, and can't wait for you to cover The Stand in the future. Thanks for all the responses, and I feel like I have a friend across the country now. Keep up the great work, Matt.
Very nice of him to say that.
I know, right? Mm-hmm. Super nice, and it's awesome. So anyway,
in response to that, and then also briefly in response to your episode with Tony last time.
Oh yeah.
Tony and that gentleman both expressed their lack of enthusiasm for the gunslinger, and I just wanted to say I pretty much agree with that.
Oh, okay.
Like I think
I thought you were going to say, and I just want to say fuck you.
No. No, I wanted to echo that because, being a huge fan of the series, I think on the totem pole of the 7 books, 1 being my favorite, 7 being my least favorite. My least favorite, number 7, is Song of Susanna, but number 6 is Gunslinger. I think I'm not saying I don't like the book. I'm just saying I think it's a little bit odd and a little disjointed and kind of you have said before how it's kind of like a preamble or it's just kind of prologue. Yeah. And so I for that reason I find it a bit of an off-putting story in the context of the series. So I actually agree with them. I do think it's a little bit dry and a little bit disjointed and what have you. So I agree with him on that. Just I kind of wanted to throw that in since I wasn't on that episode and all that. So I agree with him. I completely understand that. I think it's a tough entry into the series, and I think it kind of, I don't want to say it hurts the series overall, but I feel like if there was a better gateway, a better start to the series, I think more people might have found their way into it.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because it is, I mean, it's a quick read and everything, but if you're not drawn into it, there's no reason for you to continue on to the next one unless you have a podcast that's begging you to.
Yeah, or you have a friend who forces you into it or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that is unfortunate, and it's kind of tough because, I mean, now we have the movie that isn't going to really do any favors for people. Although Robert did say that he's interested in reading it now because of the movie, and he actually enjoyed the movie, which is really interesting because, like, I mean, hey, if you enjoyed the movie, more power to you.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how his perception of the movie would shift throughout the him reading the books and everything.
Yeah.
So my hope is that he'll continue emailing us. So
yeah, totally. Yeah. I just want to throw that out there real quick.
Okay, right on.
Yeah.
And should we go into spoilers for Jake Chambers?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to go into spoilers for our discussion of the character of Jake Chambers. We are going to be spoiling every book of the Dark Tower series. So if you haven't read it yet, go ahead and turn off this podcast and come back when you have finished the series. And I'll play a little bit of music here to get us settled into the spoiler section. And spoilers on for Jake Chambers, this discussion of Jake Chambers. So, Tiny, if in literature, the character of Harry Potter is referred to as the boy who lived.
Yes.
Could we say that Jake Chambers is the boy who died?
Yes, we could.
Yes, because he dies a lot.
That is a great moniker for him.
Yes.
The boy who died. He dies 3 times in this series.
Yes.
Poor freaking kid.
Right?
Yeah, and that's what I was hinting at in the in the early part is his experience with Ka, is that Ka is similar to destiny, and we are all destined to die. Jake is destined to die 3 times.
Right.
And so, like, that means he comes back twice, arguably 3 times. So you can't experience that without being affected by it, I guess, obviously. But like I'm saying, you know, I feel like that experience in particular of having died twice in the series, or I'm sorry, 3 times, but yeah, like twice leading up to his final death,
right?
Gives him so much experience and is such a huge impact on him as a person that I feel like those are some of the most integral parts of his character, and other characters up to and including Roland do not have that experience. And so that's what I feel like that is what makes Jake so unique, is that he's experienced death so much, unlike hardly any other person in the Stephen King universe.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's crazy. Like that's what makes him so fascinating to me. And he's a kid. Like, you know, it's not like some old guy. Like, it's not like Roland dies 3 times.
Right.
He's a kid. He never gets older than 12 years old.
Right.
It's just insane. It just blows me away.
Yeah.
And that's I wish I could tell people about that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm trying to convince someone to get into the story, I'm like, there's a kid who dies 3 freaking times and comes back and like helps save the universe. Like, how do you not want to read I wish I could tell people that, because that is if someone told me that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go buy the book now, because that's insane. Like, why have I not heard of this until now, you know?
Exactly.
So that's the coolest thing about Jake, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating to me because, like we said, he does have this connection with Roland and with the Ka-Tet and Ka itself. And then what I love is that when he dies, when he dies, under the mountains, when you know, the famous "Go then, there are other worlds than these," like when he comes back into the story in the Wastelands, which we can talk more in depth about that, because that's one of my favorite parts of the series. But when he comes back to Midworld and he's drawn back into Midworld from the Dutch Hill mansion, and he, from that point on, for a while, he has, and it recurs throughout the series, he has moments where he's like, will be in his head, in his inner monologue, and he'll be saying things like, well, Roland would never let me drop again, would he? Like he has these doubts about whether or not he would be, whether or not Roland will sacrifice him, and how he is, like, he's Roland's surrogate son. Like,
right.
Roland is his surrogate father, and like the bond that they have is very strong, but he has this very real concern, because this man who is an integral part of his life and who loves him sacrificed him just so that he could get information on how to get to the tower. So that, right. I love the way that kind of lingers throughout the rest of the series as the Ka-Tet progresses on their journey. I love how that's just this little lingering thing. Kind
of a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we kind of going back to his drawing into Midworld, like the whole, like we talked about in non-spoilers, his whole journey in the Wastelands is really fascinating to me, because it plays with one of my favorite kind of science fiction tropes or genres or tropes, I guess. It's this time paradox, time travel kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Because drawing of the 3, Roland was in Jack Mort's mind, prevented him from killing Jake. So Jake at that point now lives in 1977, and with the knowledge of him being killed.
Right.
And it's just, I love the spiral into, like you said, insanity.
Yeah.
And how that's mirrored with Roland in Midworld experiencing the same thing, having caused the paradox.
Right.
So, like, I love that journey in the Wastelands, because it kind of reestablishes the bond that they have, and it almost, to an extent, amplifies it quite a bit.
Yes.
Because in the Gunslinger, we just get these 2 kind of wanderers, and then now we have these two two characters that are intricately linked, and the first half of the novel is basically rescuing the kid and saving his and Roland's sanity. So now that we're in spoilers, did you want to kind of expand on that, or did you have any more to say about it?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said, and I think that was well put.
Oh, thank you.
And I think another notable aspect of that is that it kind of puts a timeline on it. Because if you think about it, it's not just a theory or suggested that Roland and Jake are both spiraling, as you said, into insanity. Like they are. Like if he doesn't straighten the timeline, if you will, or fulfill the destiny they're both supposed to come to, as joining into a Ka-Tet, if they don't get there in a certain amount of time, they both would just kind of go crazy.
Yeah, because
the human mind, or the Roland gunslinger mind, is just not equipped to deal with the reality of two timelines. Like that's not, your brain is not supposed to do that, and it's called a paradox for that reason. And you can't keep that in your head and not go crazy, I guess. And so it's just it's a sense of urgency in the Wastelands to get Jake into Midworld to course correct that, and to keep them from going crazy. And I think that's just another notable aspect that I find just very, really well done on Stephen King's part, because you have a sense of urgency. It's like, come on, let's get him over here. Let's make this right. Yeah, it's just something I picked up on as I was reading it both times.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, I wanted to ask you, do you think, so the first time Jake dies, Jack Mort pushes him in front of a car, and he travels to, or is transported, I don't know, whatever.
Wakes up in Midworld.
At the way station, right?
Yeah.
So I don't recall it being hinted at ever, but maybe I just didn't pick up on it. Do you think Jake was so not eager, but so willing to let Roland drop him underneath the mountain because he thinks that he was going to come back?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Because he came back from his first death, and he's aware of that in the Gunslinger.
Huh.
So I wonder if he, again, I can't think of any lines or even any fan theories I've read or anything that suggests that Jake says, go then, there are other worlds than these, and accepts the fact that Roland should drop him and let him die. Does he do that because he thinks he's going to come back again?
That's a really interesting question, because I don't think there's anything in the text to give the impression that that he thinks that he's going to come back.
Right. I don't think so either.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anything in it that explicitly states like, oh no, he knows that it's going to be the final one.
Right.
The final death. That's really interesting. I think that there is a way, like you can read into it that way. Because throughout the Gunslinger, there's a ton of kind of this foreboding sense that both characters know that it's this unspoken thing that they both know that he's going to be sacrificed. Like, and it's one of the great things about the Gunslinger is the way that Man in Black kind of taunts them about that. And I think that I think the idea of this man just letting this child die kind of takes precedence over that. Yeah. Over that kind of read of it. But I mean, it's possible. And maybe that knowledge, this is going into more fan theory stuff, but maybe that knowledge or that thought that, he'll wake up somewhere else. Maybe that's what propels him to have that kind of conscious awareness of the dueling timelines in his head.
I have kind of mixed feelings on it, because on the one hand, I think it sort of cheapens the sacrifice if he has that notion. It cheapens the fact that he's willing to die for Roland to continue on his journey. And I don't like that, because he's a very noble character, and he's a kid who always does the right thing, and he's a very empathetic character. But then I put myself in his shoes, and if I were hanging over the edge of a railroad track and looking at an abyss below me, and I was poised to die, I would think, you know what? I came back once before. Yeah. Why couldn't I do it again? But I think that as an adult, and Jake is, 12 years old, so maybe he doesn't have the, he doesn't have that notion because he's a kid. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of have mixed feelings on it, but ultimately I think because there's nothing to suggest it, I don't think that's the case. But
sure.
That's just a notion I had as I was reading it both times.
Okay. So. Yeah. And, kind of another thought or another thing to bring up on that is that, you could also say that maybe the reason why he didn't think that, or why it didn't come across in the text at all that he didn't think that, other than Stephen King not thinking of that, would be the idea that Midworld to Jake would be kind of basically the afterlife or purgatory for him.
Right.
Like even Brown even says to Roland early in the book, when he stops at his place,
that they might be in the afterlife.
Yeah, that it is the afterlife,
right? Or it's hell, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's just a thought I had as I was reading it, and something about Jake that jumped out to me.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting. Who knows?
Right. I also wanted to draw on. I hate to keep harping on him dying so much.
Well, it happens enough that we can harp on it.
Right, exactly. His sort of ultimate sacrifice at the end of the series, where he dies for to save Stephen King, essentially.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out the fact that Stephen King loves to kill kids, and he does it all the time. I won't name the books he does it in, but he kills kids all the time. It's funny because it's almost like I kind of have to tiptoe around this, but it's almost like Stephen King doesn't value his child characters. It's just like, well, I'll just kill this kid. Who cares?
Yeah.
But it's funny that I think it's, again, notable to bring up that it's almost like Stephen King breaking the fourth wall and inserting himself into the books. He has to sacrifice this kid for himself. To save himself or whatever. And it's just funny that he's putting such a huge significance on Jake's final death, in quotations. Just it's almost like his penance.
Yeah.
For not devoting his full attention to the series. I think that's partially why he inserted himself into the story, is because he's like, it was almost like after his accident, it was like his way of forcing himself to complete it, or I don't know. And so I feel like it's almost like, his penance for not putting his full attention to this and getting his ultimate story completed is that Jake has to die, I guess. And Jake has to die to save him. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just another thought I had.
The punishment of not finishing the series in a timely manner and is having to kill Jake, essentially.
Right. But it's just funny because like he'll kill this kid or that kid, and it doesn't mean the damn thing or whatever, and it's just, it's funny that he chose that. I don't know. It's
funny that insert Stephen King into the story and a kid dies.
Right.
Yeah. That makes me wonder, and this is a small tangent, and maybe we can talk about this at another time, but I kind of wonder, like, given the very different feel of the series between the first 4 books and the last 3, how there's that shift in tone because he cranked out those last 3,
right? And
he included so much like weird crap in it. It kind of makes me wonder, like, I wonder if I have no idea if he said anything to this effect or anything, but I kind of wonder if, like, in his, like, when he had his accident, like, they pumped him so full of painkillers and all this type of stuff that he had, like, fever dreams of, like, seeing the Ka-Tet and, like, having Roland hypnotize him to complete the story. Like, I kind of wonder what went through his mind during his recovery of the accident to make him write these last 3 books.
Yeah, I wonder myself.
Yeah. Yep. And to kind of go off of what you were saying about it being his penance for waiting so long to complete the story and everything, I kind of I don't know. I don't know how everyone's going to feel listening to me say this, but I kind of love the way that played out. Like ever since reading it for the first time, I have been an apologist for Stephen King's insertion of himself into the story.
Okay.
Just because I think it's kind of clever in a way, and it's Deus Ex Machina to the fullest extent, but he's a writer that's known for incorporating that. He even mentions it in the series itself. So I give it a pass, but I just think that it's an interesting way to bring the story to a close with him being part of it and being a part of, he's the word slinger. He's the person that's just delivering the message of Gan. But what I kind of love about that is, and what I love about the way that Jake dies is that there's already been established this kind of disdain between Roland and King. And I kind of feel like that was King's way. Again, I have no way of corroborating this. I haven't read anything to this effect that he has mentioned this, but kind of feel like that was King's interactions with Roland, like specifically the scene where Roland and Eddie visit King, and Roland hypnotizes him and convinces him to complete the story. Like, Roland has this inner monologue where he just can't stand him. He hates King. He's like so disappointed that this is the man that's writing his story and that is responsible for their journey and everything. But what I kind of love is the way that at the end of book 7 or 3/4 of the way through book 7, when Jake dies, I kind of like the way that from a storytelling perspective, from a narrative perspective, I like how that plays out, because you have this character who has this disdain. You have this man who is writing this character who has this disdain toward the man that's writing him, and the man who's writing him's actions or inactions or obliviousness to the world around him gets the character's like son, as for all intents and purposes, killed in a very tragic way. And like just the kind of what word do I want to use for this? The circular nature of that, the circuituity, that's not a word.
No.
This kind of the way that triangle gets comes to fruition or comes to a head,
Okay.
is just really fascinating to me, because like I said, you have this writer who the character hates, and his life is in jeopardy, and the character's son sacrifices himself so that the writer who the character hates can live and continue the story. I just love that kind of thing. There's probably a better and more word good way to analyze it, but I love the way that played out.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. I've been critical of King inserting himself into the story. I don't think it was a good decision. I think I would have preferred that he took it a different direction. I don't know what that direction is though.
Yeah.
But I'm not.
We'll have to do a Palaver episode where we just talk about that.
I'm not the word slinger though. He is. So that would have had to been his decision. But
we're the pod slingers.
Yeah, the pod slingers. I've always been critical of it, and I don't appreciate that part of the series very much, but it's not uninteresting. It's not terrible. I just personally don't care for it very much.
Sure. How do you feel about Jake's situation with that regards to it?
Yeah, it was the best decision to make in regards to that storyline.
Okay.
If he's going to make the decision to insert himself into the story, I think the gravity of that scenario playing out is very heavy gravity. You know, having Jake die as a sacrifice to save Stephen King if you're going to do that, that's the direction to take it, because you need to make a big statement in regard to that if you're going to insert yourself into the story. And having Jake make that sacrifice was a really big statement. So if that's the decision he had to make, then I think that was the right decision to take. That was the right direction to take it in, despite the fact that it's tragic and hard and sad.
Yep. Yeah, I can definitely see your point there. And we'll talk more about King's fourth wall breaking in a dedicated episode to it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk a little bit about, we kind of skipped over this a little bit, but let's kind of, and we can kind of start to wind down a little bit, but Jake's kind of coming of age in the Wolves of the Kala novel. So in Wolves of the Kala, he befriends Benny Slightman the younger, and he becomes, that's his, really the first time in the series itself. It's like the first time that he gets to be a kid.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, it's a wonderful thing. Like I absolutely adore the interactions between him and Benny.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say Benny before or did I say Kenny?
I think you said Benny.
I think I did. I don't know. It's been a long day. So anyway, him and Benny, it's such a great thing, which makes Benny's death all the more tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And it just informs so much on his character, on Jake, that I just love it. That's his coming of age.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you feel about the interactions between, or the friendship between Benny and Jake, and your memory of how it affected Jake's, his interactions within the Ka-Tet?
It was a great way to shine a light on who Jake was as a character, because he doesn't really, that's the first, like you said, the first point in Jake's story that we're exposed to, that he makes a friend, and he gets to be a kid, and it's a, again, kind of a sad or tragic juxtaposition to see him being a kid, but then he's interpreting it as a gunslinger, or so he has such adult or mature notions and thoughts throughout his interactions with Benny Slightman, that it's just kind of sad. It's kind of sad to see that he finally gets to be a kid, but he can't really be a kid because he has all these thoughts and these intuitions, and his use of the touch comes into play so much that he's privy to this information that allows him to not be a kid while he's being a kid, if you will. They're jumping from the loft barn into the hay, which sounds like a amazing time. Even as an adult, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Right.
And he's just having these notions that they're, having these conversations as they're climbing back up into the loft. And it's, it's about Benny's relationship with his dad and what his dad does. And that allows the more gunslingery adult version of Jake to come to some conclusions about how the town works. And it's like, even when he's having fun, he can't switch it off all the way. So. Right. But it is charming at first. There's a lot of really nice sentences where it talks about Jake's laughter and stuff like that. And it's very touching. And that's some of the lighthearted stuff that I was trying to reference earlier on in the episode. That's, it's a ray of sunshine amongst the wolves.
Right.
It's those are a lot of nice moments in Wolves of the Call, and that's why the first time I read Wolves of the Call, I didn't like it that much, because I feel like it was such a huge departure from the story, and it's like we're on this journey, and it's just such a huge stop on the way, and it's like it's 500-600 pages of this whole separate story that doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the main journey, and I'm like, let's just continue on the journey. Let's not dwell in Colibri and Sturgis for 2 weeks or however long they're there.
I think
more like a month.
I want to say it's 2 weeks to a month, which is not an answer at all.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I want to say it's because I think that Andy gives them the warning is that the wolves will arrive in 30 days. Something like that.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. But anyway, I love him being a kid.
Yes.
And also, that's kind of the point in the book where or the series where we also get Susanna's possession, essentially.
Right.
And I like Jake's kind of reaction to that because like you said earlier, he's the one that's so in tune with Ka, and the Force. He's so in tune with Ka that like he can feel like when Roland and Eddie are keeping secrets about Susanna and how they're not addressing the problems and everything. He can feel the Tet starting to break.
Yes.
And that's just, I love that element to the character of Jake, is that he is so in tune with the bond that they share. And it's just, it's one of the elements of the stories that I really love.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then to kind of wind down a little bit more, him and Father Callahan in book 7. So they go into the New York and then they go into the Dixie Pig, to save Susanna. And it's one of my favorite parts of the entire series just because I love Father Callahan. I think he's a fantastic character.
Agreed.
And his interactions with Jake, it's like this, it's kind of this grandfatherly kind of thing. But it's also like Jake has this, he has such a strong knowledge over Callahan because he's a gunslinger and he's kind of guiding him that way. And then the final like kind of battle where Callahan sacrifices himself or he dies is just such a great culmination of that kind of pairing.
Yes.
And as much as it's kind of hard to read the characters all kind of not disbanded, but going off into their own different adventures for the final run of the story. At least in the beginning of book 7 and the end of book 6. It's satisfying. The Jake and Callahan story is really satisfying to me.
Yeah. And I think it's an especially, touching relationship or especially, notable, I keep using that word, but a notable relationship is, and I think the reason is because Jake has this clairvoyance, he has the touch, so he can read people's minds, and sometimes he does so without trying to. He just picks up on something, but he's not trying to pick up on it. Like when he picks up on Eddie and Roland being a little bit at odds over Susanna. With Callahan, he's like an open book. Like when they got there, he just told them everything.
Right.
They told him his life story. He's like, I'm an alcoholic. A bunch of people died because of my inaction or whatever. And it's like, I've been fighting vampires and I'm not a good person and I was a priest. And he's just like so open. Like Jake knows everything about him. And so like Jake doesn't have to worry about what kind of secrets are lingering behind Callahan's
scar.
Yeah. He doesn't have to worry about it. It's just like, he's like, I know everything about this guy. And so it's like, he doesn't need to kind of keep his abilities in check, I guess. So I feel like it's almost like Jake can be more of himself around Callahan, or it's just one less thing to worry about, I guess, when he's teamed up with Callahan at the Dixie Pig. Yeah. And that's exclusively something I just picked up on. It's not, again, I don't know if that's explicitly mentioned in the text, but I think that's just a coincidence or a culmination of aspects of each character coming together that I think makes sense. And like you said, the whole grandfatherly thing, Jake did not have a good relationship with his father. And so, Roland fills that need and that role. And I think Callahan can also, that's also part of that role can be filled with a grandfatherly relationship as well. So it's probably something that a young boy probably yearns for and needs. And Callahan certainly fills that role, and does so satisfyingly. So yeah, that was a great part of the book. And Callahan, I think, not to derail the conversation about Callahan, but I feel like Callahan was in search of a meaning to his life, or a meaningful conclusion to his life.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
I think he'd been ready to die for a while, kind of, but he was waiting for something that was meaningful or important, and he achieves that at the Dixie Pig. So
Yep.
yeah.
Oh yeah. And kind of the last thing about Callahan, and we'll talk more about him in the future of the podcast, I'm sure. But I just like one of my biggest critiques or criticisms of the series is that I kind of wish Callahan would have shown up earlier in the series.
It's true.
And in the Ka-Tet, because he's like the honorary member of the Ka-Tet. And he's such a great, fascinating character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I don't really have much else to say, and we're kind of running a little low on time.
Yeah.
Final thought though. One of the other things, this is a very light thing, but I like that his kind of weapon of choice is his father's Ruger.
Mm-hmm. And
I like the way that when he's in Midworld and they're in the Ka-Tets together and everything, like you've got Roland with his revolvers and you know, you have all this kind of somewhat antiquated or Western style weaponry. And then you've got this kid with a Ruger. It's like, it just feels like I love the meld of the modern and the old fashioned.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep. Any parting thoughts on Jake Chambers?
We didn't talk a whole ton about how in essence, he's Roland's son,
mm-hmm.
and how that relationship blossoms and expands throughout the series. But I think for the most part, it's very touching because mm-hmm. Roland needs to be humanized. You know, he's such a stoic and mm-hmm. Which is you used that term in your episode with Tony
mm-hmm.
That he's a very stoic character, and I think that's a perfect adjective. He is very stoic and he's been through so much shit, and he's so old that he's just kind of like over everything, I mm-hmm. guess. And he's moved on just like Midworld has, and so he's just so dark and bleak that he needs a bright spot in the form of a relationship with a surrogate son or a spiritual son, if you will. That it softens Roland so much that it makes him that much more of an enjoyable character. And that's all the result of Jake and how his relationship with him. And it's a great part. Again, to use my term from earlier on, it's a ray of sunshine amongst the darkness of the series. Totally.
And like his connection with Roland and everything, it's, what was I going to say about that? It like you said, it definitely, not lessens, but it lightens the character of Roland. Mm-hmm. And that is something that's needed, because in that first book, I mean, our introduction to him is massacring an entire town, and then later he lets a kid fall to his death.
Right.
It's like you need to soften him up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I think that will do it for our discussion of Jake Chambers, the boy.
Yes.
So if you have any thoughts on Jake, or if there's anything that we didn't touch on that you want to let us know about, feel free to give us an email at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And next week, Tiny, do you know what we're doing?
Sleeping Beauties?
No, that's after that.
Okay.
As long as I can finish it. No, next week is going to be a special kind of Christmas present episode to our listeners.
Oh yeah.
Yes, we are recording a commentary track for the Dark Tower movie.
Yes.
I've owned the Blu-ray, and we're gonna watch it, and we're gonna talk about it. Yeah. It's funny because like I think I tweeted that, or I think I just sent you a picture of it. But the special features, like, I don't know. One of the headings of one of the special features, like, it's a featurette that's has different chapters, and like one is like Through the Keyhole or something, and then the next one, like, the next one is Worlds Other Than These, or something, and I'm like, at least proofread when you're doing this. It's other worlds than these. Like, only one of the most iconic.
Or get the reference right.
Yeah. So, But anyway, it's going to be fun. We're going to have fun with it.
Yeah.
I think it'll be an interesting experience and probably pretty cathartic.
Yeah.
So we will have that for you guys next week. And anything else we need to talk about?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you guys for listening. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
Yay! Thank you for listening to Tower Junkies, a Dark Tower podcast presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more of our episodes at TowerJunkiesPod.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or anywhere else podcasts are found. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can find ways to do that at TowerJunkiesPod.com/donate, or become a patron for Obsessive Viewer at Patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer for recurring donations with different reward tiers. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. Any and all feedback on the podcast is encouraged. You can contact us by emailing us at matt@obsessiveviewer.com, or by tweeting us at TowerJunkiesPod or at ObsessiveViewer and at ObsessiveTiny. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/TowerJunkiesPod. For more podcast content from ObsessiveViewer.com, check out Anthology, my solo side project podcast where I'm reviewing The Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and exploring other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology television shows. You can find Anthology at anthologypod.com and anywhere podcasts are found. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com and subscribe to the podcast on the app of your choice. Once again, thank you for listening to Tower Junkies, and we'll see you next time.